So what would you say is the best way, like, to build community in the church, or are there, like, any way that you can build it?
I think building community starts with taking off the pretense and the masks that people generally tend to wear, and just being willing to take a risk and being yourself. And the church needs to be a place where people cannot pretend and don't feel like they have to pretend. Because I've heard so many people say something to the effect of, I really need to get back to church, or however, or community or whatever, but I need to get myself straightened up first, or like I need to get my act together first. And that's such a it's sad that people feel that way, but I completely see how they feel that way, because I think many churches have, maybe not intentionally, but they've kind of set up this standard because everyone's smiley and
like
everyone is like everything's good, and not enough people are really willing to be honest about the things that they're facing. Like, I'm struggling with this, substance abuse, or I can't stop cursing, or my marriage is falling apart, or I hate my boss, or the list goes on and on. But does the church even do a good job of creating an environment and a space where people can be vulnerable like that? And just be themselves. I think I would want to believe that there are so many people who follow Jesus who want desperately that kind of community, that kind of an environment in their spiritual community. And I'm not saying that it's not happening. I just don't think it's widespread enough and kind of like broad enough that there are plenty of people out there who have the opinion that the church is just like kind of just a bunch of hypocrites, or people who just act like everything is okay.
Would you ever say that it's okay to leave the church because of a poor church community, or do you think, because I know it's two-sided, like you have responsibility and so does the church, but just your thoughts on that?
I think that you can leave a church with a clear conscience if you know you have done everything you possibly can do to foster the kind of community that really is going to be good, not just for yourself, but for other people. I don't see people leaving the church for those reasons. So I see people leaving the church for far shallower, sillier reasons than that. But if you really know in your heart that you've done everything you can to contribute to the kind of community that you yourself are looking for, and maybe there's just no reciprocation and nobody else in that community seems to be interested in that, then I think you can just kind of like just move on and maybe find a new place.
Do you think there are like any specific things that you could be doing yourself to feel more a part of that community? I think on some level you just have to be willing to take a step of awkwardness and take a risk. I think it's probably about 5 to 7 seconds of feeling weird about just taking a risk and opening your mouth or saying something that maybe other people aren't saying, or introducing yourself, to someone new or to several someones. But once you get past those few seconds of awkwardness, then you've broken through and you know that you've done what you can do to create the kind of environment that really needs to be created. But I think everyone, no matter who they are, everyone has power. You have power to inform change. You have power to impact the people around you. And maybe that's part of the problem. Maybe it's people aren't really owning the power that they already have to make the change that they could make. Instead, they let things happen to them rather than making things happen for others. And I know, at least on my part, and I'm not saying this like with church, I have been times where you feel a little bit like an outsider, like you've been in and you've been out of it, and so like
I guess, like you said, like taking that step and like, you know, kind of realizing like, hey, I'm not, and like even though it's not, you feel that way, you know, and like taking the chance to like actually, you know, go forward and talk to someone.
I hope for you and for anyone else that has ever, and it's so common that someone will, I don't know what the right term is, maybe just kind of wander off or disengage for a period of time. I hope that this isn't true for you or anyone else, that when you find your way back into that community, you don't feel like people are looking at you weird or like judging you because where have you been all this time? You know, I totally understand that it's human nature to, you in your own mind, you make up your mind that other people are thinking that.
Yeah.
Whether they're thinking it or not, you in your imagination, you're kind of reading into things that probably aren't even there. But I want to be a part of a community where even if someone for whatever reason just steps away or they disengage, number one, I want to keep loving them. Like I'm not very good at this, but I want to like communicate love to them just by a simple like phone call or text message, or hey, I'm thinking about you right now, I want to know how you're doing, that kind of a thing. And as a pastor, what I've tried to do is I've really tried to get away from communication that is indirectly shameful, where like I'll reach out to Megan and I'll say, Megan, you haven't been at church, and that just makes you feel bad, like you haven't been at church. So instead I should reach out and I should say, Megan, I love you, and I just want you to know you're on my heart today, and I'm praying for you, and how have you been? You know, how are you doing?
It definitely takes away like the judgmental aspect of it when you ask it that way.
Or I drink coffee or I eat lunch every day and I would love to eat lunch with you. You know, that kind of a thing. Rather than, tisk, Megan, you haven't been doing what you've been doing. Because I just don't think that's reflective of God's nature either.
Do you think, and I know you've been at this church, but I'm sure you've been to other churches and seen other things like that before. Do you think most churches are following like that, or do you think like, or at least with your own personal like experience, have you ever felt like you've been in that situation where you feel more judged or like in that, you know?
I remember, I don't have a really good, like a solid example, but several years ago, I was given a sabbatical where I took, I think it was like 5 or 6 weeks, where I was just able to just go and rest, and, you know, I didn't have any responsibilities on staff at church. And I visited a church, visited a different church every weekend. And that was kind of the fun part about it. And I remember going to one, and this was a big church, lots of people. And I remember standing in the lobby of that church it was a good solid 15 minutes at least, surrounded by people who were conversing. And it's not like it was a subway station where everyone is moving. Like everyone's just kind of standing around talking, conversation. Nobody said anything to me. And I wasn't looking for a church, but I remember leaving that church thinking, if I was looking for a church, I wouldn't go to that one, because no one went out of their way to do that. So to answer your question, I would love to believe that every church has a critical core of people in that local congregation that have this heartbeat, that have this passion, that know that we're all screwed up and we all need a savior, and no one deserves to be judged. Like, judgment has already been placed on Jesus, so we don't judge people, and we just want everyone to feel welcome. I want to believe that in every church there's a core of people that think that way and believe that and are trying to live that out. But I also know that we're such a we're a conditioned culture where, like, everything that we do and see, it's through a filter of how we want to present ourselves, you know?
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of rawness, there's not a lot of like authenticity. But if I sit down, if I had the time
to sit down with every person in our church. And our church is a pretty good sized church. Like, it's bigger than the average church in America. But if I had the time and the ability to sit down with everyone and just eyeball to eyeball have a conversation, what are we, like, 3 feet away from each other, and just sit and talk, I want to believe that we would have that in agreement. Like, we would say, yes, this does need to be a place where community is authentic and people can find actual real friendships and people can get connected and know that they have this awesome network of support. And when the mortgage comes due and they don't know how to pay their mortgage, they have people around them that can support them and can help them, or if their pantry is empty, just say the word and you'll have half a dozen people showing up on your doorstep with a bag of groceries for you, or whatever the case. But I want to believe, and I do believe, that there are people, and maybe there's just not a lot of outspokenness about that.
I mean, do you think there are people in the church who actually don't want that? Because I feel like, I wouldn't know of anyone.
I would have to say,
how do you make that happen? How do you have that conversation?
So Jesus says, you will know a tree by its fruit. And I don't mean to, I hope I'm not being unfair in what I'm saying. But when I come to a gathering of people and it seems and feels like there's not a pulse there, like there's not an aliveness there in Christ, it feels, whether this is unfair or fair, I'm not really sure. It feels like people are just kind of putting in time. Like it's just kind of like a religious activity. Like okay, God, it's 9:00 on Sunday. I'm going to give you an hour.
Yeah.
And I'm going to sit there and I'm going to cross my arms. But if they don't play the songs that I like, or if the preacher doesn't say things that I want him to say, I might not come back, And I don't think that's the majority. I definitely don't. But I have to be honest to say my perception and my observation is that there's probably some of that in probably every church. There is. And again, that's super generalized and really broad. But
I also feel like it's personality type as well. I know for me, like, I've had times where, like, this is something stupid, but for me it was a big deal. Like raising my hands in worship. I remember the time I did that. I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
But I did it because it was like I felt like I had to. But being more of an introvert, I don't think, like, and I'm sure you've thought about this before. It's just you're not going to speak out as much and you're not going to be as loud. Like, even though I'm sitting there really quiet, it's like I care. I'm just not going to, necessarily show that I care, I guess.
Yeah.
But, I think there's a little bit of that goes on as well.
Megan, that's good. A good thing for me to hear, because because not everyone behaves the way that I think they should. That doesn't necessarily mean that they hate Jesus or they'll hate the people around them, you know. But by the same token, I do think that when I bring energy into a room, it ought to be reciprocated on some level. Like if I come to you and I'm like,
that'd be awful.
Man, I'm so excited to see you.
And
you're just like stone faced and like straight faced. You don't give me any response. I just want to be careful that we're not gathering in worship like that. And it's not about showiness, and it's not about, like you're talking about, like raising your hands. It's not necessarily about outward expression. But you can kind of look at somebody and you can kind of be like, are you here? I know you're here physically, but are you here mentally and emotionally and spiritually and socially? Are you here for like community, or are you, it's as if there's like a time clock in the back and you like kind of punch in and you're doing your time, and then when you leave, it's like a job almost.
I mean, how do you like help someone like that? Like as a pastor, like what would you, I know you talked about reaching out a little bit. But.
I think it has to be a matter of prayer in the beginning, because really when you come down to it, that's work that only God can do. Only God's Holy Spirit can break through to people. I can, as a pastor, as a Christian, whatever, I can do a song and dance, I can get excited, I can do cartwheels, all these different outward expressions. And I might be, I don't know, I might jolt somebody or shock somebody or do something, but if the Spirit isn't in it, then it's not going to be, a lasting change. So first of all, it has to be a matter of prayer, and then I have to model it. Like I have to, this is an example. When I drive through my neighborhood, and it doesn't matter what street I'm on, if I'm in my low subdivision neighborhood, I wave at everybody. That whether I know them or not. If they're in a car, I wave at them. If they're on their porch, I wave. If they're walking their dog, I wave. Because my feeling is I want to live in a friendly neighborhood. I want to live in a neighborhood where people wave at each other. If I'm not waving at each other, or waving at other people, I have no right to complain that I don't live in a neighborhood where people aren't waving. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
So I think there has to be a practical outplay of, this is the kind of community I want to be a part of, and so I'm going to be active in making it that.
You have to like give a little bit as well.
Yeah. I have had, over the years, I've had a number of people that some have come to me beforehand and most have not, where they'll just kind of stop. They'll just stop coming to our gatherings, and they just kind of like fade away. And it might be weeks or months before like I even really realize like, oh, where's so-and-so. And I might get together with them because I found out they're going to this other church across town.
Yeah.
And I remember this was years ago. There was one guy who stopped coming, and it wasn't soon after I was able to just talk with him about it. I was like, what happened there? Like, I mean, I know that like our church community is not everyone's thing, right? Like I know that there's great churches in different places, but I just wanted to know, like, something go wrong? Did I offend you? Like, and he felt like he was a hand raiser, like when we worshiped, and he didn't feel like other people were, and so he didn't feel like that, like this was the place for him. Okay, all right, fine. That's your reason. If that's your reason, then I thought it was a horrible reason. But
was that all he?
That was his thing. Like I don't know what. Like maybe he felt like he was more into like passionate worship and really going after Jesus more than other people were. Okay, well, if that's the case, if that's how you are, how do you help a community by subtracting yourself from it? Like if you think more people should be like you, whether that's right or wrong, the last thing you want to do is take yourself away from them, because then you completely forfeited any influence that you had. You maybe you could have been an example and an influencer, but instead you decided to, I mean, and I don't mean to be harsh, but you kind of decided to be selfish instead and said, people aren't on my level, and so I'm going to go somewhere else, and I'm going to try and find people who are as spiritual as I am. And I just felt really, I mean, I have to respect people's decisions and their, whatever they decide to do for themselves, right? And that's their prerogative, that's their thing. But it breaks my heart when I'm standing on the other side of that argument saying, we need more people that are passionate about their faith and authentic with their walk with Christ. And we need them to be a part of this community. So the issue, there's a similar issue with like young adults, like our young adults, just historically in our church, young adults, a lot of them, too many than I like, or too many, I should say, more than I would like. After graduating high school, they just kind of like disappear, like they vaporize. And the argument, almost all of them, has been, well, there's no one here who's like me. There's no one here in my age. Well, leaving sure isn't going to solve that problem, because what you've done is you've just perpetuated the problem. What if, instead of doing that, what if you stayed and really dug into the community, and you invited somebody else to dig into that community, and then there's 2 of you, pretty soon there's 4 of you, and then there's 8 of you, So,
I mean, do you think the church should create something like specific for them, like a different service or a different, allow that to happen? Or would you say it's just supposed to be put on them to figure it out?
Such a great question, Megan. Great question. I think, and this isn't a cop-out question, I think, so I do think that it's on the church, it's on the culture of that community to be intentional about communicating love and a place for those people. Now, not everyone is cut out to be a worship leader. Not everyone is cut out to like run the sound system or, just kind of the stereotypical places of ministry. But I do think that we would do better to have more young adults in places of visibility, like someone who's just willing to be the welcoming face, like when we have our gathering together. Like the first face you see is like a 20-year-old saying, isn't it awesome to be together, and would you just like turn to somebody and say hello, and we're going to sing this song together, right? So the church should do things that are intentionally setting a place at the table for young people. I don't think, and this is kind of like the careful part, I don't think a separate worship experience is the right answer for the long term. I don't, because here's what happens. We have young adult gatherings twice a month on Saturday evenings. Okay. We have music as part of that. It starts with dinner, which is awesome because who doesn't love food? And then it moves into just like a time of worship music. We have a great band that leads worship. And then there is a message or some type of teaching or something. To me, that's dangerously close to basically replicating what a whole church gathering would be, The problem, if you stick with that, is that young adult they're not going to be prone to engage as much in the whole church, the multi-generational crowd, the way that they need to, because they're gonna feel like that box has been checked. I went Saturday night and we had some worship, and it was a little devotional from the Bible, and maybe even the same pastor was there, doing the same type of communication and whatever. I do think it's the church's responsibility to kind of program and format and structure things in a way that makes young adults welcome and noticed and wanted multi-generationally. But it really comes down to the individual's decision, like the choice. But the way that I look at it is this way. Have I, as a part of this community, have I removed every barrier possible to someone sticking in the community? Or have I, maybe not even knowing it, have I created barriers for people to stick to the community? Because I want everybody to stick. Like, let's just say that you, Megan, let's say you've never been here before. This church that I go to. Let's say you've never been here before. And let's say you walk in, and it's a Sunday morning, and you walk in for the first time. A coworker, they recommended our church, and you checked out our website, and you're like, oh, all right, that looks okay. And you come. I feel like it's on me, the person who's already here, to remove all the barriers for you to not return a second time. And I think you have to be careful, because I can be overbearing. Like, I can be like, oh, here's my, come sit with me. And depending on people's personality, that might be like, oh, that's too much, right? But when you leave, I have to know that I've done everything that I can to remove every reason that you would have to return. And it's always going to come down to your decision. Is Megan are we ever going to see her again? You're the one who gets up in the morning and gets dressed and gets in the car and drives wherever you want to drive. So it's ultimately on you. But I do think, and I'm sorry for this long-winded answer.
No, you're good.
I do think it's the church has to have a mentality of there's room for everybody. So the last 20 years, 15, 20 years, a lot of research has been done on teenagers graduating high school and leaving their faith, leaving the church, leaving their faith. A lot of them do return after that kind of desert period because, to be honest, a lot of that 18 to 25 is kind of spiritual desert time where you're questioning everything. You're being introduced to new ideas, new relationships. You walk into intro to philosophy on the university campus, and your professor, first words out of his mouth is, "You've been lied to. Everything they've told you is completely untrue. I'm going to tell you what's true." And there's this disassembling that happens in the higher education system, and they're just stripping you bare so that they can kind of add more stuff, right? So I understand all of that. I understand that when you graduate high school, there is a natural phase of life where everything is up for grabs, including your spiritual health and your faith. I understand all that. However, back to the research. The research has shown beyond any doubt that the young people whose faith is authentic and who actually stick in the faith community and who have a real genuine relationship with Christ are coming from churches that have been intergenerational, whether intentional or not. When we have young people who are sitting at the table, so to speak, with 70-year-olds and 40-year-olds and 30-year-olds, and everybody gets to see everybody, and there's a good example set of this is what a 72-year-old follower of Jesus looks like, and this is what a 55-year-old follower of Jesus looks like. So those young people get to kind of grow up in this environment where, okay, I know what it's like to follow Jesus after the age of 18. Because a lot of churches, and ours included for a really long time, we didn't mean to do it this way, but we built a structure so that students felt super tight in community in middle school and high school, and then almost zero community after they graduated. And that happened for many years, and we're like literally in the middle of repairing, all of that right now, making significant changes in how we do what we do to be able to address that. Because I know it's everyone's individual choice, but as a pastor, I don't want to tolerate the idea that I didn't do everything that I could do to make sure everyone feels welcome in the community that I'm a part of. So anyway, that was a lot of talking.
No, it was great. Thank you. I'm just a little bit curious. This doesn't really have to go with this that much, but do you think, I read this first, I can't remember which one it was, you may know, but like those who have grown up in the church will eventually come back?
I think statistically,
or is that just
for sure? I think that here's the way I've seen it. Okay, so I've been here long enough that I've watched teenagers graduate and get married and have children, and now they're bringing their children to church. So I've been here that long. I've been here almost 18 years. So I've watched almost like the whole adult life cycle. I mean, not death, but it's not that long. But I have found that even if a young person kind of wanders off and goes through that desert stage of their young adult life, it's very commonly parenthood, and even if it's before parenthood, like relationship and marriage, that they kind of like, it's almost like a circle. Like they might exit here and they kind of go through this stage where they're questioning everything, or they maybe even turn from God, or they turn to drinking or whatever it is. But then somewhere along the lines, a lot of times they meet somebody, or they have a trauma in their life or something, and it brings them back around to realize that, okay, what I grew up under was not just a religion, or wasn't just a program, or wasn't just something to keep me busy. It was actually true. Like Jesus is actually real. And the things that I'm facing in my life right now, or the challenges that I have, like Jesus is part of all of that. And I want him to be a part of all that. So when statistics are quoted about young people leaving the church, I always kind of like take that with a grain of salt. I'm kind of like, all right, well, I mean, maybe that's true, but there's always going to be a percentage of that percentage. They're going to go through that period of life, and they're going to like find their way back. And as a dad, I have 4 kids myself. I remember distinctly telling my oldest daughter, I said, Jesus doesn't need my help in proving that he's real. Like, he'll do it himself.
Yeah.
I mean, I want to live authentically. I want to live the fact that the Bible's true and Jesus came and died and rose again. I want to live all of those wonderful things. But truth doesn't need my help to like I'm not pleading with anybody. Like, please be convinced, or, you know, like, I'm not like a salesman trying to like talk people into something. And even if my own kids in their spiritual walk, if they kind of go off, like way off in left field in some kind of weird, like, there is no God, let's just say, they go through this phase, of course I'm going to be heartbroken as a parent, but I also know that I'll continue to love them, and eventually, hopefully sooner than later, eventually they're going to realize that I wasn't just a pastor trying to like keep attendance up.
Yeah.
I wasn't trying to like, you know, make a paycheck or something. Like, I believe this stuff because it's real, you know. So I remember that conversation with my daughter, just telling her, hey, I said, you can go and try it, whatever you want to kick the tires of, whatever other worldview or belief system or whatever you want to call it, religion. I don't really like that word, but you can try it all. And I am firmly convinced that Jesus can stand on his own 2 feet because he's real and it's true.
Yeah.
So, people may leave, and that bums me out for sure, because ultimately I just know that it's wasted time. In fact, I was on my way here, literally just now, and I got a phone call about a young person who has found themselves in some bad decisions. And one of the things that they're lamenting now, that they're sad about, is they got disconnected from spiritual community. And they draw a direct line from the trouble they're in and the poor decisions they've made with disengaging from spiritual community. Like, I've never seen anyone, okay, when you have an actual authentic, I'm just going to speak for you're a part of our high school group, like our high school students, okay? We're not a perfect, and I'm not even going to say, like, I'm not going to say every person in there is like a perfect person. And you can come to one of our gatherings and get your feelings hurt, for sure. Like, I know that can happen, right? However, I do think that we have at least a level of authenticity. Like, we just want everyone to have a good time and feel welcome. We want to see you and notice you and welcome you and all those things. Okay. I've never seen anyone leave a spiritual community that has authenticity and be able to stay spiritually healthy. I just don't think that works, because I don't think God designed us that way. I don't think you can have a 16-year-old be a part of this authentic spiritual community for whatever reason. Maybe they get a girlfriend or a car or a job or whatever they get, and they're like, I'm not going to do it anymore. And then they go over here and they see what the world is doing, and they're like, oh, that looks like fun. And party this weekend? Yeah, for sure, I'll go there. And then they end up like hooking up with somebody sexually, or they get involved in drinking or something, and then that starts to snowball. And then they, once you do one thing wrong, it's definitely easier to do it wrong again. And then, and it becomes a habit in that direction. And that's where this young person is right now. So they draw a line from, I don't know why I left this. So my sadness of when people leave community, it's not a judgmental sadness. It's just like, I know, because I lived it too, you're going to waste your time. You're going to go and look in the world for something that just doesn't exist there.
And I'm not saying that you should make mistakes, but do you ever think that they're necessary for growth?
Oh, yeah.
Because I feel like, I know with me, my surgery, having to go through that, being alone in my room, isolated, having no friends, no relationships, that's kind of where I drew the line. I was like, okay, it's been 5 years, what are you doing? And I went back. And I get what you're saying, of course, like wasted time, but do you ever feel like those instances are necessary for growth?
I think they're redemptive. I mean, of course, the way that we learn is through experiences, for sure. Experience, and I would even say failure in whatever degree, is a far better teacher than success. It's one of the reasons, parenthetically, it's one of the reasons why, because kids who grew up in the church, they bemoan their own testimony because they feel like it's boring. Like, I wish I was addicted to meth, or I wish I sold myself sexually, or I wish I'd been to jail, because that would make a way better story. Like that would be super like dramatic, and people would listen to me. But and I get that. Like, but if you're gonna pull away, and even if you're gonna go through some difficult or maybe even unhealthy decisions, I do think that God can redeem those things for sure. Like he'll use a negative decision or a negative situation, and he'll weave that into the good that he wants to do in your life. So I don't have any doubt when this young person that I was just referring to, when they return, because that's their intent now, because they saw like, oh, here's what happened when I left. When they return, that's going to be part of their story. Yeah. And I think it's going to be a powerful part of their story as well. And I think it's going to be kind of like a cautionary tale for themselves and for other people, who would listen. So now we have someone, presumably, who's kind of like back in our spiritual community, and he can share his testimony, and not like right now, but eventually. I think it would be good for him to say to other people, hey, if you're thinking about just kind of going over and wandering off and seeing what the world has got, if you can just listen to me and say, it's not there. Whatever you think worthwhile is over there, it's just not there. My goal as a pastor is not to stop people from making bad decisions. My desire as a pastor is to just walk with people through whatever decisions they're making. And I've been through some really crappy situations with young people of their own making. And I just think the nature of God is, I see the mess that you're in. I love you regardless of the decisions that you made, and I'm not going anywhere. So to me, that's reflective of God's grace and his nature to redeem. So I can't sit here as a youth pastor and say, man, I wish teenagers wouldn't make mistakes, because I, as a teenager, made a bazillion mistakes. But it's all part of my story. It's all part, God used it all. I said recently, God will use whatever you give him. If that's a dreadful sin, if that's a past pain or trauma, if that's a conflict, if that's an unanswered question you have, whatever you give him, he will use. Whatever you give him, in fact, he will do more with it than you could ever do with it. So I would just say, if you're kind of like in a place where you feel disconnected or you feel unloved or unlovable, just hand that over to him and let him do something with it. So sorry, more too much talking.
No, it's good. I was also just wondering about like welcoming people in. Do you ever think that there's a line of being too welcoming, almost like you're not giving over your own beliefs, but in order to have that person come into the church, where do you think the line is with what you can and with what you can't say?
Well, I think that organically starts to come at a place where the relationship can handle it. Let's just say, I'm gonna use a silly example, okay? Let's just say someone walks in the door, and I've never met them before. I would not say to them, hey, I believe that hell is a literal place. Like, I believe there's actual fire, and people are actually going to spend eternity separated from God. I believe that. Like, that's just a weird...
A little bit much.
Right. That's like in your face. And you could use, any other conviction or example. But as I get to know somebody, and as I have multiple conversations with them, these things start to emerge organically. And those questions start to, like, by that point, if we've known each other for 6 months, or maybe shorter even in some instances, then the relationship can handle the heavier stuff. But to answer your question, I definitely think that you can, like, come on too strong. You can do things and say things that might be off-putting. This might be a silly example, but all right, I'll just say it. I'm like a hugger. Like, I like to hug. Like, if I know you and I see you, I want to go over and give you a hug. And that's just the way that I was brought up. Like, I grew up in kind of like a hugging, very affectionate family.
Yeah.
I totally get Like, Megan might not be like, okay, that I'm not. Maybe you didn't grow up that way. Maybe that's not your comfort, level. So, also, and especially even as a pastor, like I want to be careful. And they walk in, I'm not gonna like throw my arms around this total stranger. Like that's just weird, right? And I would weird them out, and they would probably never come back, and neither would I. But eventually, maybe once we get to know each other, and because there are lots of people here who went through that process. Like there was a moment in time when I looked them in the eye and I introduced myself, and my name's Jerry, and I shook their hand, and that's just a normal cultural thing to do, right? Like some kind of normal greeting. But I want to be careful not to. So that's on the physical level, but on the spiritual and like verbal and social level, I gotta be the same. I gotta be careful,
Yeah.
So, but naturally, and this is what I was saying, like organically, those conversations will come up eventually. Yeah. Like I had a conversation with a guy last night, and I haven't ever talked to him for more than like 2 or 3 minutes in the past. He's a dad of a couple of our students, and he was just waiting for things to wrap up, and so I just sat talking to him. I was blown away by who this guy is, and like what he does for a living, and some of the things that he like the degree that he has. Like I heard him say he's been to Asia. Like I want, and so weird or not, I was just like, would it be okay if I just like called you up sometime and we can grab lunch? And cause I've heard a half a dozen things in the last 30 seconds that I want to know more about. Yeah. So he was totally cool with that. So he and I are going to take strides in our relationship, and over time, there might come a time when it might be more appropriate for me to say, like, so I heard you say this, and I want to talk about that because I'm not sure that that's God's best for you, or I'm not sure that's the right attitude for you to have. But I'm never going to say it to somebody that I just met. Yeah. That's just awkward. Yeah. Weird. And that'll push people away. And that's not what I want to do. So I don't know if that answers the question that you had.
It does.
Okay.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
And just switching gears a little bit, with COVID, did you see what did that look like in the church, and I'm assuming more people left with COVID, and I'm asking a bunch of questions at once, and I'm really sorry. But, and I know that's something you shouldn't do in an interview. Right. But also, like, do you think that there's a substantial substitute for coming together in a church?
Yeah, this is one that I've really wrestled with myself. COVID, I think I hope that people aren't upset if they hear this, but I think in some ways COVID has been a blessing, because on the church level, it has given us an opportunity to just kind of like hit the reset button on some things that really needed to be put to rest. Things that the church historically has done, local churches even, and that can change from church to church, but things that have been done in the past and they just kind of got stuck in tradition, like, oh, this is just what we do because we've always done things this way. COVID gave every local church an awesome opportunity to use that as an excuse just to stop doing really anything that we don't want to do anymore. Yeah. Our church is very purpose-minded. We know that we have a mission. Jesus gave us what we call the Great Commission. We know that we have a direction, and we have things that we're called to do, and then we have purposes on top of that. So anything that isn't clearly serving one of those 4 purposes that we have, for us, it's connect and grow and serve and reach. Those are our 4 purposes. So anything that doesn't blatantly do one of those 4 things, we just kill it and we don't do it anymore. And there were actually some things in the life of our church that needed to be just put to death, because they didn't serve a purpose other than perpetuating a tradition of some type. So COVID did us a favor in that regard. I think probably like most churches in America, our church went through, well, first of all, there was this mass exodus because it was a mandated thing. Like, you're not allowed to be together. Okay. And so then we, like, within a span of 7 to 10 days, every pastor in America became an expert almost in live streaming and technology and YouTube and OBS and all of the tools that right before that, in February 2020, we had never heard of those things. That's hyperbole,
Yeah.
But everyone had to pivot so quick to learn, okay, how do we stay connected with people even though we can't be together? So I remember I had, for months, I had like this makeshift studio in my family room at home, where I had like lights and a camera and this Tonight Show idea, like desk, and it was sitting there and talking to a camera. And we live streamed that on YouTube and stuff. Same thing with small groups. We had to learn how to do Zoom and try and get people together. So to answer that part of the question, COVID just like really threw a curveball at the church, and we're still recovering, and I think it'll still be a while before we do. But what came out of that, I remember a pastor by the name of Andy Stanley, in an interview, he said, we need to prioritize connection over gathering, because the age of gathering, like people just, there was a time when people would go to church because the doors were open, and that's just what you do. And that's 50 years ago. In the last 10 to 15 years, it's kind of like, but I mean, I also have a lake house, and I'm gonna go watch the game or the race, or what I'm kind of like. And so we kind of morphed into this. Church would be nice. Church is a good idea, but I've got 3 or 4 other things, including yard work or sleeping or shopping, or we just bought an RV and we're going to take that out for the weekend. So we've morphed into church is just one, sometimes the lowest of many options. Travel ball and tournaments and all these different things that happen on the weekends. But now we've gone even a next click over, and we have a culture where, it's barely an option. Like, it's barely a viable option when I have so many other things. And for those of us that it is still an option, how beautiful is this? I don't even have to get dressed. I can stay in my bed if I wanted to, because I got a big screen in my bedroom, and I can just turn it on. It's a smart TV, and I can pull up my service at my church that they're doing, and they either pre-recorded it or they're live streaming it. I don't even have to get up. I can just have my coffee, and I can sit here, and I still feel like I'm part of church.
I mean, was the connection the same, or was it very different?
Absolutely not. It's not the same. I think that people would like to say that it's the same, but I don't believe it's the same. And our church we call it an online campus. So there is and we have a pastor for that campus. I don't know how many people know this, but we have a pastor assigned to minister to the online campus community. Okay, so that's how seriously we take connections, right? Now, I would love to say, and this comes from a little bit of an old school thought, I would love to say that the online is really just kind of a first taste. If you're going to be in the online campus, maybe it's only going to be for maybe a month or so. And then you're going to be like, all right, I'm going to this church, I'm going to get. And then also, I believe it's in Hebrews, we have this instruction that says, don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together. Now, I suppose that you could exegete that, and you could tear it apart and go back to the original language, and you could say, well, online or metaverse now, if everybody has their Oculus VR headset on, then that's assembling together, isn't it? But again, I'm kind of an old guy in an old school. I think sitting down with somebody in person, I just don't think there's really a substitute for that. So anyway, but I do think for the meantime, we want to make sure, if you're not going to be in the building, I at least want to know that you feel connected, that you feel a part of us. So I know you play volleyball. Okay, so I'll use you as an example. When there are times when your volleyball commitment, it conflicts with a small group or a worship gathering or something, right? That happens a lot. And that has nothing against you. I'm just using you as an example, right? I used to, maybe 15 years ago, I would have been like, I hate volleyball. Volleyball is taking Megan away from us. But my attitude has changed over the last several years, and that is, it's not that there aren't as many people in the room, my attitude is now, okay, Megan's not here. Number one, do I know where she is? Do I know how she's doing? Do I know that she is strong enough spiritually right now to prioritize the people on her team so that she views her team as an opportunity that God has given to her to minister to people? So I don't hate volleyball or baseball or show choir or lacrosse or football. I don't hate any of those things, but I do feel like as a pastor, I want to know how those players and those performers or whatever it is, how are they doing spiritually? And am I staying connected enough with them? And am I encouraging them spiritually enough so that they're viewing that extracurricular activity or that club or that sport? Are they viewing it in a way that's like, okay, I can't be in spiritual community, like I can't be at church or small group, but I am in communion with God. I'm in community with Him, and I know that He's with me on this volleyball court or on this stage, and He's given me these gifts, and I want to give it back to Him. So,
and when you like first start, I guess, how do you find that balance though between? Because I know for me, I've struggled with that like a lot, of knowing like, okay, like, because I guess sometimes it can feel like, and this isn't anything against a church or the pastor or whatever, but like it can feel like what I'm doing is wrong. You know, going to volleyball or doing all these things, like it's taking a lot of my time. It's one of those like idols that you say. I know, especially before I started coming back, that's what I really felt, and I still left anyway. But it's like, how do you find that balance between coming to church, playing your sport, wanting to, you know, use the gifts that God gave you and glorify Him in that way, but also spend time in community with the people here?
I think, it comes down to individual choice. So, and I don't know that this is a very common thing, but let's just say it's volleyball sign-up time. Megan decides she's going to sign up for a volleyball team, and she's going to make that commitment. And it's like months at a time, right? She's going to make that commitment. I do think that in that moment, I think there needs to be like a cognitive thought in your head that says, okay, if I'm going to make this commitment, how am I then going to upkeep my spiritual health? Because that's the priority. Like if your spiritual health, I've lived long enough to learn this, if your spiritual health isn't intact, if you're not healthy spiritually, it doesn't really matter how healthy you are in other ways. I could be making boatloads of money, I could be in the best shape of my life. If my spirit, if my relationship with God isn't right, then nothing else really matters. So I think it falls to either the athlete or the parents of the athlete to kind of keep that in front of that young athlete, to say, okay, you have this interest in guitar, or you have this interest in volleyball, or this interest in acting, whatever it is. That's awesome. First of all, let's recognize that God put that within you. He gave you that interest. It didn't come out of anywhere. I've watched you, Megan. You're so good. Like, you're really, really good at volleyball. Okay, so you can look at that and say, okay, I have this skill. I have this gift that God has given me. So how could I just grab it and run when He's the one who gave it to me? How can I just grab it and say, this is all for my enjoyment? Like, this is just all about me, right? Rather than saying, okay, God, you gave me this gift, so I'm counting on you to show me how you want me to use it for your glory. And I completely understand that sometimes that's going to take you away, just schedule-wise, from spiritual community or worship gatherings or small group conversations and things like that. But that doesn't mean it necessarily has to take you away from like spiritual health. I just think you have to work a little bit harder to keep that intact. So hopefully that
was good. I'm pretty much done with all of my normal questions, so I'm gonna like stop this.